All right, we talked about opening arguments on the Shane Donahue trial in the last video. Now we're going to talk about the first witness that the prosecution called, which was Detective Wing, who was the lead detective on Shane Donahue's missing persons case back in 2010. And it blew my mind. And this is why I said in the first video that if I were a member of the Donahue family who was sitting there, and they were all there. So Tim Hickerson had his whole family there. Shane Donahue had his whole family there. And both of these sides are obviously very invested in this trial. And, you know, both sides very much believe that their side is right. You know, Tim's family very much believes in his innocence. Shane's family very much believes in his guilt. Oh, and I did say he was the first witness. I do apologize. He was actually the second. They called up Lieutenant Dennis Jensen with Prince William County Police first because he's the one who took the initial missing persons report. He was a patrol officer. And honestly, that testimony went fine. I didn't think that it really scored a lot of points for either the prosecution or defense, but he was a necessary witness to give context to Shane going missing and just filing the missing persons report and how and when that happened. So that's kind of what he did. So he took the missing persons report on the 24th, 2 days after Shane was last seen with Tim. And then Shane's mom, Donna, provided names of people who might have information about where Shane would be. Two of those people are Emily Kinnaman, who we mentioned before, and Tony Matong. They were found at Bungalow Ale House. They didn't really have much information. They didn't know where he was. They were able to ping Shane's cell phone eventually and did a general search of the area in their cruisers. They contacted hospitals and jails, obviously didn't find him. The last known location of Shane's phone was on March 22nd, and it was 0.99 miles southwest of the tower in a rural area. That's basically very close to where Tim and his family lived, Hickerson Lane in Nokesville. He went to Shane's house, saw that nothing appeared to be missing. It was fairly well put together, no clues. The neighbors and his landlord had not seen him. And then Eisenstein crossed him, showed him different photos of Tim's house. Jensen believed it looked the same. It didn't appear to be ransacked because the TV and the Xbox are still there. He doesn't recall drawers being opened. It seemed as though Eisenstein was trying to show discrepancies between the pictures that the prosecution showed Detective Jensen and other pictures that Eisenstein was showing Detective Jensen, but we didn't really see the pictures, so I don't know really what the discrepancies were. There was a comment about how Emily Kinnaman told the family that Shane might have been kidnapped, and it was like and we were in the court going wait a second, what? That's insane because we had never heard that before. And then on redirect, Sweet said that basically it was a joke, that Emily said that as a dark joke, and she laughed after she said it, oh, maybe he was kidnapped, obviously thinking that he was fine somewhere, maybe on a bender or whatever, but that he'd show back up, not remain missing 15 years later. So it was a dark joke, but I mean, it was an interesting moment. Oh, let's get to Brian Wing. Brian Wing no longer works for Prince William Police. He works for the Office of the Inspector General now, but he was with Prince William PD for 27 years. Now, he says that he did 9 or 10 interviews, which truthfully does not sound like a lot to me in this case. But he says he received numerous leads about Shane's location, none panned out. He ended up getting phone records for Tim and 2 phones that Shane had. Then, this is the part that I've been talking about. Get to the point, Kona. The prosecution played a recording of an interview that Detective Wing did with Tim Hickerson. We've heard portions of this in previous hearings. So I kind of knew what to expect from this. The jury did not, obviously, right? They never heard any of this. They played it in court over the speakers straight through. It was, I would say, between 20 and 30 minutes long. Straight through with no commentary, no text, nothing. And even though it was being played over the courtroom speakers, Tim Hickerson has a very strong, Virginia accent. He's hard to understand in general. And at that point, he was in active addiction, which, nobody's saying he wasn't, right? So he was in active addiction for sure. He could have been high at that moment. He was so hard to understand. Plus, the recording wasn't great. There was a lot of white noise, and I was watching the jury, and they weren't nodding off or anything, but they were looking a little glazed, some of them. And why that made me crazy is because this is such an important piece of evidence to the prosecution's case. This interview is where Tim flat out admits to the burglary. He says that Shane was at a party. He went through Shane's back door, which was unlocked, went to where he knew he kept pills on his mantle, stole 3 of them, and was going to take 2 and, give the third to a friend and basically go somewhere else and party. Then there's another part where Detective Wing, and I believe this is what I remember from the preliminary. I think this is what he asks him, but I couldn't hear it yesterday or Thursday. He asks Tim something along the lines of, is Shane's body on your property? To which Tim replies, it shouldn't be. I mean, you guys already did the search. It shouldn't be. If it's clear that they already kind of suspected him of something at this point, and he answered, it shouldn't be. His body shouldn't be on my property. That is an insane thing to say. But nobody made any mention of it. It just played in the courtroom and nothing happened. Then he talked about how Shane being missing is a big discussion around Nokesville. They talked about a girl named Stephanie who Shane apparently had a sexual relationship with and had been seeing. Don't know what the importance is of that because nobody said what the importance of that would be. And he talks about how Shane wanted a gun for a while, but then he just went off and talked about guns for 10 minutes. Have no idea if any of that was relevant, or if it is relevant, why is it relevant? Because we had no context to this whatsoever. It made me insane. So I'm sitting there going, okay, so it's weird that we're listening to this straight through without a break for 20 plus minutes. And meanwhile, the prosecution was talking to, another lawyer, clerk or somebody, telling him to go get files. So they're distracted and talking while this is playing, which to me tells the jury that this isn't important. So don't worry about this because whatever you're hearing isn't that important. You guys just listen and we're going to try to, prepare for the next thing, which is insane because this is so important. So at the end, I'm like, okay, well, we're going to listen to the whole thing. And then they're going to go ask Detective Wing specific questions about what we heard on the tape. Except they didn't. They didn't ask him a thing about that interview, about what they heard. They said they don't have any further questions. So they just played this, no context, no follow-up. No even hey, this is hard to hear. This is what was said. Nothing. Honestly, there was a little bit of a cross that Eisenstein did again, but it wasn't even that important because there was nothing that he even needed to cross. And this is what I'm saying. If I were a member of Shane's family, I would have lost it because that was such a missed opportunity and it was such an unforced error. This family has been waiting 15 years for Shane to have his day in court in this format, and this is what they got. And it was so confusing to me that I even asked somebody who was an attorney, I said, is there a legal reason why they only played the tape like that and didn't ask specific questions about the content or anything? And they were like, no, I don't know why it was done that way. Now to me, and again, I'm a civilian, I don't know all the rules of evidence, but to me, the way I would think that this should have been handled was you have Brian Wing on the stand. So one would think that he can testify to what's on the tape because he's party to the conversation. So I would have played section 1 because he admits to the burglary really early on in the interview. And he does it in a very casual, cavalier way. He does it like a man who doesn't think he's going to be charged with a felony 15 years later, right? So I would play that portion of it and ask Detective Wing some clarifying questions so that the jury understands that they just heard Tim Hickerson admit to stealing 3 pills, which is what forms the basis of the burglary charge against him. You've got to drill that into the heads of the jury. Like, hey, if you're wondering how we're going to prove it, this is how. Then I would play this section where Wing asks him if they're going to find Shane's body on the property, and he says, well, it shouldn't be there. Like, play that section and go, hey, why did you ask, Tim, if you're going to find Shane's body? Like, maybe bring that into it. Like, why were you suspecting him in the first place? And, so, hey, he says you guys already did the search. Can you tell us a little bit about that search? Like, talk about the fact that the Hickerson farm was searched in March of 2010. And he said it shouldn't be. Then, he goes off on about all the guns. So is it important? Are these guns important? Because I think that they are, only because Matthew Sweet brought up the fact that Tim got Shane a gun in his opening argument. So to me, that has to be important. So maybe take a moment, pause, and explain why and how that is important. And again, I don't know rules of evidence, so maybe there's a way you couldn't do it that way, but it does seem to me that you have to do it in some way to show the jury that this is important evidence that you're listening to, because I don't think they even heard half of what was said. And I wouldn't have heard half of what was said if I wasn't already expecting those things to be said, because I know what's in that. So I literally don't think they were able to process what happened. And that is some of the prosecution's strongest evidence, in my belief, based on what I've seen at previous hearings. And they really needed to nail that, and they didn't, because I've been saying for a while, the prosecution very much has an uphill battle. It's a no-body case. They don't have a murder weapon. They don't have forensics, and that's fine. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't be bringing this case. But what I'm saying is, if you have that many obstacles to overcome, you have to come out swinging, and they did not. So honestly, that was the biggest deal of the day for me. After that, the rest of the afternoon was just getting the cell phone evidence admitted in, and talking to a guy from T-Mobile and talking to a guy from Verizon. And, it was all very foundational and important. The defense was trying to get the cell phone data thrown out, which again, obviously they would try to do that because that is another part of really strong evidence that the prosecution has. They did not succeed in getting it thrown out, but we didn't actually get to hear any of the cell phone evidence at that point. So that we're going to hear on Monday. Mike Colgan, who was the one who hired Shane for the job, testified, and that was also foundational, just basically saying that Shane was doing this job for him and was paid $3,300, and it came in 2 checks, which Shane cashed in the days leading up to his disappearance. So it was possible that at the time of his disappearance, Shane Donahue had potentially up to $3,300 in cash, which, again, can absolutely go to motive. So, we haven't gotten there yet, but he was just laying that foundation. Anyway, so that was day 1. And I don't know. I'm glad that we're going to be able to hear the cell phone evidence, because that's a big thing. When they arrested him in 2024, they said, we've got this new cell phone technology. So I'm waiting to hear it. We got a preview of it during the preliminary hearing. They're having somebody different testify now. They're having an FBI testify to this. And it's the same FBI agent who's also going to be testifying in the Montefiore case about Naresh's cell phone usage. So that'll be interesting to see what he has to say and how he presents this. And hopefully he can present it in a clear way that makes sense to the jury and makes the point that they're trying to make. But we'll see. So anyway, that was just day 1. We've got court Monday through Friday next week. I'm going to be there for almost all of it. I'm going to have to miss one of the mornings, but there we are. So any questions you have, ask away.